Hello everyone, Dr. Yonit Arthur here, audiologist and strength coach. You are on the Steady Coach, and today we're going to be talking about the top 10 reasons why your dizziness recovery is stalled, or that your chronic dizziness symptoms are actually getting worse. And this applies to you whether you're dealing with a diagnosis like 3PD or PPPD, MdDS, vestibular migraine, cervicogenic dizziness, post-concussion syndrome, or any other medically unexplained dizziness diagnosis. And the number one reason is that you still believe that there's something physically wrong with you and or that you have some kind of incurable, rare neurological disease. The root cause of chronic dizziness symptoms is an overactive danger mode response in your nervous system. And if you are new to my channel or you've been on my channel and have only seen one or two videos, please check out the video I will link to above and in the video description on basics of neural circuit dizziness, which goes into much more depth on this topic than I'm going to today. But the short version is, since danger mode or an overactive nervous system response is what's causing your dizziness symptoms to happen, if you are feeding into that danger mode response by believing that there's something horribly wrong with you, you are not going to be able to fully recover. Now, many of the other tools on my channel will be helpful to you, such as techniques that involve exposing yourself to things that you've been avoiding, relaxation and mindfulness. But if fear mode is still activated because you believe that you're just managing your symptoms and you can't get better, you aren't going to be able to fully resolve this condition. And that's related to reason number 2, which is that you are only using vestibular rehab therapy, exposure therapy, and cognitive behavioral strategies to help yourself. So these include wonderful tools like vestibular rehab exercises, like getting moving again, like stopping avoidance, like changing your mindset, like conquering fear. These are all very important tools that I talk about a lot on my channel. However, while they are addressing danger mode about your symptoms directly, they are not addressing the root cause of danger mode in the first place. Your chronic dizziness symptoms started before you first got dizzy. And what I mean by that is, yes, your dizziness symptoms started when your dizziness symptoms started, but your nervous system was set up to end up in chronic symptoms long before you actually had the dizziness symptoms. And this is usually from cumulative stress over time that has not been fully addressed. It can include things like early or later traumatic experiences or just very challenging periods in your life. It can include losses of people close to you that have caused a lot of grief that you have not been able to work through. This can include ongoing, very stressful situations and relationships, like strained romantic relationships or caregiving situations. And this can include chronic ordinary stress that is leading you to a pattern of internalizing stress by putting more pressure on yourself. And I talk about all of these things elsewhere on my channel. But notice that none of those things that I just mentioned are going to be addressed via VRT or exposure therapy or reframing and working on your mindset. So from my experience, when people aren't getting better using just those means, it's because we have to dig a little bit deeper into why the nervous system response is as hypervigilant as it is. And that's how people can achieve full recovery. So by all means, if you're doing things like VRT and CBT and that's working for you, please continue. But my suggestion is to add a component of digging back to understand why your nervous system was in this position in the first place. And I talk about this a lot in my free course, which I will link to in the video description, please take it. Again, it's free, and I review this in a lot of detail in steps 5 and 6 of the course. Reason number 3 why you are stalled in your recovery or symptoms have gotten worse is that you just need more time. As we just talked about, the process that led to this hypervigilant or over-alert nervous system was likely a long one and took years to end up causing chronic symptoms. So while you are working through this, it makes complete sense that it would take your brain time to reprogram that response. And in the meantime, I highly recommend you develop a practice of tracking process goals instead of outcome goals. So outcome goals would be those that are focused on dizziness specifically, or actually physically recovering, which by the way is the goal here. So it's no secret or surprise that you care about that. However, focusing on that when this may be a long process for some of you is going to feel discouraging. Focus instead on the things that you're doing really well. And that includes things like tracking your avoidance. How much on a scale of 1 to 5 are you avoiding activities? And thank you to Maya for operationalizing that one for me. How much motivation do you feel to do the activities that are helpful to you? And even just keeping track and giving yourself a check mark when you complete a self-care activity can be a really helpful way to track your progress and see your process as you continue to get better, even before you resolve symptoms. And number 4 is that you are experiencing the normal ups and downs of recovery and you are freaking out. Recovery is not a linear process for most people. It occurs in peaks and dips, and that is completely normal. And by the way, if I ever discover the secret to linear recovery, you will be the first to know. But in the meantime, again, this is something that not only is normal, but I basically expect from people. So if you are wondering why your symptoms have gotten worse, you may just be in a normal dip as part of the recovery process, and your job is to exercise as much outcome independence as you can. In other words, don't focus on your symptoms for the moment. Focus on the things that you're doing well and try to keep your faith that you can recover from this. I know that's really hard, and that's why I have a membership community, which is where people can go to get reassurance that these dips don't last. And from my experience, they do not. And over time, they get less frequent and less intense, but they are a normal part of recovery. Which brings me to number 5, which is something called an extinction burst. An extinction burst is when you really start to understand and internalize all of these things, you realize you can get better, and your symptoms double down. You can think of it like this. Your nervous system's job is to protect you, and its job is not to be subtle. So if there were a tiger running at you, you would not want your nervous system or your fight or flight system to tap you nicely on the shoulder and say, hey, when you've got a minute, check out that tiger. No, you would want it to yell in your ear, get out of here as quickly as you can, right? So that's how your fight or flight system works. And while your brain is still under the impression that things like moving or being still or looking at lights or looking at screens are dangerous, when you stop paying attention to those triggers and you start to push through them and you're like, I'm not afraid anymore, your nervous system might push back by turning the symptoms up to make sure that you know that these things are dangerous. The only way out of an extinction burst is through. So here are my suggestions if you think this applies to you. The first, of course, is to keep going. My experience is these don't usually last longer than a few weeks. But I also want you to think psychologically. Make sure that you are being honest with yourself about what might have led to this extinction burst in the first place. Is there a source of stress that really needs your attention? Were there conflicts? Were there emotional factors that you have not been addressing that are leading to this intensification of symptoms? And you're going to want to address those to make sure that your symptoms come back down. The other reason that extinction bursts happen is because you're suddenly paying more attention to your dizziness. So if you think that that might be the case for you, you might also want to set some boundaries on how much time you're spending doing dizziness-related recovery stuff, and we will talk more about this in a minute. Reason number 6 is you are over-focused on eliminating symptoms. And I get it. The reason you're here is because you're suffering. You want this stuff to be over with. You would like nothing more than to eliminate your most annoying symptoms right now. And I share your goal. I want you to feel better. But when we focus our attention on symptoms, we are sending the brain the message that the symptoms are important. That is the last thing we want, because when the brain thinks something is important, it keeps directing your attention toward it. It turns the volume dial up on it so you're even more aware of it. So there are many different strategies that you can use here, but going back to some of the things I said earlier, this is where process goals can also be incredibly helpful to help get you out of the focus on symptoms. This is also why I typically don't suggest doing vestibular rehab exercises to resolve certain symptoms. Now, for people who are new to dizziness or who have a physical issue causing dizziness, that's totally appropriate. But if you have chronic dizziness, if you have medically unexplained dizziness, and this has been going on for some time, you want to spend less time focusing on symptoms and more time focusing on pretty much anything else. Which brings me to number 7, which is that some people, especially my type A overachiever types, come into this dizziness stuff full force and make healing a full-time job. And again, admirable and awesome, and I applaud you for being an A+ student. The more attention and time you spend on this thing, the more you tell your brain it's important. So of course, there is a significant time investment that you're going to need to put into this to get better, but I suggest putting strong boundaries about that, and in between your allotted dizziness times, you do anything else other than healing or dizziness activities. Or if you're doing healing activities, you're sure to frame it as self-care, as growth, as taking care of yourself, rather than as something you're using to combat symptoms. Now, this looks different for everyone, and people who are newer to the recovery may need a little more time throughout the day than people who are getting by or who've been doing this for a while. So it's a little bit of a find your own balance situation here. But in my membership community, I have something called a roadmap for recovery, where I basically just list all the tools I talk about for free in my channel and my free course. And I give you different categories and tell you to select 1 or 2 activities from each category each day. And this can work for anyone, no matter what stage of recovery you're in. Just make sure you pause and tweak your routine. If you think you're being too much of an A+ student, brainstorm about what you can do to make yourself a B- or C+ student. But that also brings me to number 8, which is the opposite. Sometimes I meet people who really aren't putting anything into their dizziness recovery. And this often includes people who have been dealing with this for a long time, so they feel a lot of hopelessness, they feel a lack of agency about this. Oh, this is one more thing that's supposed to heal me and it's not going to work. And I get that. But for this to work, this particular approach, this neural circuit approach or mind-body approach, you have to have some kind of daily practices, and you have to be doing some kind of emotional awareness and expression work. So my suggestion is that at minimum, you have some kind of daily mindfulness practice, whether that's formal meditation or breath work or mindful walking, in which you are practicing just being with yourself in the present moment and accepting yourself as you are. And at least once a week, you're working on some serious emotional awareness, digging into past experiences, processing old stress, working on building self-compassion, and many of the other important tools that I talk about on my channel. This relates to number 9, which is that people sometimes are waiting for someone to fix them. And again, this makes sense in the biomedical model of disease. There is often a cure, there's a pill, there's a procedure, there's something to help you. In neural circuit stuff, the only person who can help you is you. And that can be really, really scary for people to hear, especially those of you who ended up here in the first place because of a history of feeling disempowered and like you had no control over your own life. So this can be particularly terrifying for some of you. But I want you to know that I believe in you. And I know you see lots of comments here on my channel, but if you look through them, you will see people just like you who've been able to get better. And especially in my membership community, which if you're interested in joining, I would love to have you participate in. We have a whole section called Progress, and we have a whole section called Graduation, where people share their stories of improvement. So again, this is something that you can do. I believe that no matter where you are in this process, no matter how debilitated you feel, if you have neural circuit dizziness, with the right education and the right tools, you can recover. That said, the only person who can do the healing is you. And that brings me to number 10, which is that you might be receiving some contradictory messages. Now, you might be all bought in onto the previous 9, but if you're still receiving messages from medical professionals, from doctors, from friends, from loved ones, that there's something horribly wrong with you, or you have some kind of incurable disease, or that the only way to help you is to manage you by putting you on a bunch of medication, that might not be helping you in your recovery. And as you all know, I am neither for nor against medication. I think medication can play a very important role in people's recovery. I'm not saying no one should take medications. I'm saying that if a physician is giving you the message that your condition can only be managed and it can only be managed by giving you medications, that is taking power out of your hands. That's increasing danger mode. That can keep symptoms going. I hope this video was helpful to direct you towards some of the areas in your recovery routine that might need some tweaking. And I look forward to your questions and comments. Please drop them below. If you enjoyed this video, if you found it helpful, please like, please share, and please subscribe to my channel. It helps me reach more people. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for tuning in.